Okay, this chapter is really going to be about your special senses. So when we talk about these, we're going to talk about eyes, ears, taste, okay, etc. All right, so these are your much more complex, okay, these are what we think of when we think kindergarten, right? Smell, taste, hearing. Equilibrium is actually included in this. That is part of your ear component and, of course, your sight. So let's start with our sense of smell. The olfactory nerves, as we looked at with the nervous system chapter, is the nerves that is responsible for your sense of smell. You have these little receptors, okay, at the top of your nose. There are nerves on there that lead into your brain. I'll show you a picture in a moment. And your sense of taste and your sense of smell work together. And, you can think about that. If you ever had a cold or a flu and you get very stuffy, okay, you usually can't detect any tastes or any foods, and it makes you kind of not want to eat. So without smell and that chemical aerosol aroma of smell, you really can't taste. So they have to be together. All right, this is what the roof of your mouth looks like. So you'll see in B that we're kind of blowing up just this very top portion of the nose, rather. I'm sorry, not the mouth. And you can see all these little receptors that are in the skin, okay, at the roof of the nose. Each of those receptors is attached to a nerve. Those nerves go through tiny little holes that you see, okay, inside of the skull, and they take those nerves into the brain to be detected, okay, your sense of smell inside your brain. All right, there are a couple of different organs. I'm not going to spend a load of time with a lot of super details on these, just a couple of key points. But the olfactory receptor cells are bipolar neurons. We saw bipolar neurons looked in chapter 9. They have a lot of cilia, which is those hair-like projections, and a lot of mucus in the nasal cavity. And really, a lot of what that's for is that mucus and a lot of that watery fluid is to help detect the chemicals. The chemicals can then be dissolved in that mucus fluid. And then we have our ability to sense smell. So those odor that we detect are actually small chemical particles, okay, getting into the top of the nasal cavity, being picked up by those sensors, and then being taken to the brain. Okay, and the cilia helps to make sure everything stays in there. All right, there are some olfactory bulbs and olfactory tracts. I'm not really going to spend almost any time with this, but essentially what this says is that all of those little receptors are attached to a bulb, which makes it look wider. I'll flip back to that other picture for just a moment. Okay, so you can see that there's some bulbs on the inside, just looks nice and wide, okay, as they head in, and then the tracts, okay, lead into the brain. All right, they are primarily taken to the temporal lobe and the frontal lobes, okay, for detection. And we've talked about both of those lobes with the nervous system as well, so they should be familiar to you. All right, each odor is a slightly different set of proteins, and the way that those chemicals, okay, hit the roof of that nose and they sort of dissolve in that mucus and in the fluids is going to really give you, okay, that sense of smell. So there are different chemicals, okay, that it picks up, which is why you can smell different foods, right? Chocolate doesn't smell the same as coffee, okay, et cetera, et cetera. What happens is you do get an action potential. So when all those little chemicals reach the nose, that causes, okay, those sodium ions, okay, to move from the outside of the axon to the inside, and just like we talked about again with the nervous system. All right, so really just that different combination, okay, of the chemicals and how they hit, okay, makes this what we call olfactory code, which tells us, again, what type of food we're smelling. They do adapt very quickly. So again, if you kind of walk in and you smell something very strong, okay, very pungent, okay, if you just sit in that same room for 1 to 2 minutes, what's going to happen over time is that the nerves sort of stop firing all that information to your brain, and you're not going to smell it quite as much anymore. All right, our sense of taste. All right, we do have taste buds, of course. They are located in what we call the papilla of the tongue. So I'm going to show you a picture next, and I'll show you what the papilla are. Okay, so when we look at the surface of the tongue, it actually looks kind of bumpy, but when you look at it from the side, what it is this sort of up and down, okay, sort of configuration, okay, and that is the papilla, okay, one of these little up and down components, and of course there are thousands of them all over the surface of the tongue. On the inside are the taste buds that we traditionally associate with our sense of taste. All right, we do have taste cells, which are called gustatory cells, located inside the tongue. They do contain small little hairs that are sensitive to taste. They also have pores, which are tiny openings if you think about like the pores on your face. Again, this is really just for the chemicals to help be dissolved. Just like we talked about with the nose, okay, you have to have some saliva, some mucus in the mouth in order to dissolve the chemicals in your food, or you really have no sense of taste. Okay, and again, if one of those two isn't working, right, okay, they both have to work or you really get no sense of taste or no sense of smell. Okay, so it's how we dissolve those little chemicals, okay, inside the body, okay, that makes a difference. Right, there are really 5 types of taste, so sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and what we call umami. Some people call that like a savory, if you think about like a meat or barbecue style flavor, right, that might be a very savory flavor. It doesn't sort of get associated with one of the other 4. There are some textbooks that also recognize an alkaline, which is a very base sort of taste, or a metallic sort of taste. And our taste buds really do have different concentrations on different locations in our tongue. So sweet receptors are the most plentiful towards the tip of the tongue, although sweet receptors are the most numerous, which is why we like sweets so much. Sour tends to be along the outside edges of the tongue, and salt receptors are very widespread. Again, salt is one of those chemicals that we can taste pretty easily, okay, even if we don't have a great sense of smell or our sense of taste is not real fantastic. Because we have so many salt receptors, we can usually taste that quite easily. Bitter tend to be towards the back side of the tongue, and that umami are again widespread. If you think of Chinese food, that is that MSG that they add to it, so it gives it that really savory sort of taste. Taste buds are responsive to one taste sensation within its receptor, right? So it has one of those 5 sort of tastes, but it is the combination that sort of makes food so pleasurable. And again, taste receptors rapidly undergo adaptation. When you first take a bite of food, right, it's going to taste very flavorful, but if you let it sit on your tongue, okay, it's not going to really taste any better, okay, or any different, okay, if you let it sit there. Taste goes through a couple of nerves, primarily the facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus nerves. These go to the medulla oblongata and the parietal portion of your cerebrum, and we looked at those portions with the nervous system. All right, hearing. All right, so we really, from an anatomy perspective, have 3 sections of the ear. The external portion, which of course you see on the outside, the middle, and then the inner section. In the intersection, we're going to talk a lot about with hearing and our equilibrium. So let's start with the outer portion. Okay, the ear consists of an auricle and an external acoustic meatus, and the outer ear really ends with that tympanic membrane or that eardrum. So let's take a look at our picture. All right, so the outer ear, okay, is the auricle, which is the outer portion of the ear. Your external acoustic meatus, which we often just call the ear canal. And it ends, okay, with this lovely little tympanic membrane, okay, which is the fancy term for the eardrum. All right, beyond the eardrum, we have the middle ear, and we have what we call the auditory ossicles. There are 3 bones, essentially, that we see in the middle of the ear. Okay, so let's take a peek at these, and they're extremely small. I'll show you a picture of them in a minute. But they go from the tympanic membrane in. The 3 bones are the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, and most students have remembered this with the acronym MIS. So malleus, incus, and stapes. Now they are bones, so they are jointed. So they do have the ability to move against one another, and we need that to happen. And we'll see when we talk about the sense of hearing why we need that to happen. All right, that stapes, okay, ends at a little window we call the oval window. Okay, so if we take a look at our picture again, right, our malleus, our incus, our stapes, and underneath the stapes, okay, is something similar to our eardrum. Okay, it looks like a flat piece of tissue. Okay, that is the oval window, and it will vibrate. So what should ideally happen is that when the sound waves come from the outside, they should travel through that external acoustic meatus. Okay, it should vibrate the tympanic membrane, just like the head of a drum. It will move those 3 bones, and at the end of that stapes, we've got another very similar sort of eardrum or piece of tissue that will vibrate, okay, underneath it. All right, what it should do is it should amplify the sound waves, and to amplify really just means to make them louder so that we can hear them pretty well inside of our ear. All right, this is just a peek at what those three bones look like against a penny, so you can see that those are the three smallest bones of the entire body. Okay, your malleus, your incus, and your stapes. All right, there is an auditory tube that comes from the middle ear, and it actually connects your ear to your nasopharynx. So let's take a look at the picture again. So this is the auditory tube. It comes off the center, goes down to the nasopharynx, which is part of your throat. And that's kind of important because we do have some drainage from the ear, okay, down into the throat. And in fact, when you've got a throat infection, you can often feel it in your ears. If you've got an ear infection, you can sometimes feel it drain into your throat. And that's because it's just to help drain that excess fluid, so we don't have too much fluid pressure. It helps drain it down into our throat. Okay, the mucous membrane infections of the throat then can travel up, right? So if you get a throat infection, it could turn into an ear infection because, right, the bacteria will literally travel up through that tube, right, and create a problem. All right, our inner ear really contains a couple of parts. The labyrinth portion, which I won't spend a lot of time with, and then the cochlea and the circular canals, which I will spend much more time with. Okay, so let's take a look at our original picture. All right, so this section here that kind of looks like a snail is circling around, that is the cochlea. Okay, and this other portion here that looks like it's three loops are your semicircular canal, and the labyrinth is just the open space in the center. Okay, let's take another look at one other picture here. Okay, so this is just a close-up view. Okay, so this little snail-like portion is the cochlea. These three little circular components are the semicircular canals. Okay, this is primarily filled up with fluid, and as you're going to see when we talk about hearing or our sense of hearing, this is kind of important. All right, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, so please don't get very involved. But there are a number of compartments inside of here and a number of membranes. So if we were to take a little cross section, okay, of this and to look in it, you're going to see a number of membranes, some little hair-like cells, which we will talk about in a few moments, and then a whole bunch of fluid that runs through all of those little sections of that canal. There are a couple of organs, the spiral organ or the organ of Corti, okay, which lies in the center, and I'm going to point that out to you. So this is found right here. So they look like little hairs, okay, that stick up. And what this does is when these move, this actually helps to give us a sense of hearing. Okay, it does lie, okay, here underneath a little membrane, so you can see these little hair cells, and on top is a little membrane, so that when sound comes in, okay, it moves this membrane, which moves the hairs, therefore we get our sense of hearing. All right, we're going to talk about our sense of hearing and then our eyesight, okay, with our next video.